Chapter 2. From the day of Pentecost AD 33 to the conversion of Constantine the Great AD 312 or 312. Look up, my soul, pant towards the eternal hills. Those heavens are fairer than they seem. Their pleasures all sincere glide on in crystal rills. There not a dreg of guilt defiles, no grief disturbs the stream. That Canaan knows no noxious thing, no cursed soil, no tainted spring, no roses grow on thorns, nor honey wears a sting. Draw near, ye weary, bowed and broken-hearted, ye onward travellers to a peaceful bourne, ye from whose path the light hath all departed, and ye who are left in solitude to mourn. Though o'er your spirits hath the storm cloud swept, sacred are sorrow's tears since Jesus wept. God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. 1 Corinthians 1:27. To condense into a few pages the history of the Church of God for 3 centuries demands a choice of theme and power of concentration that fall to the lot of but few. We must acknowledge our indebtedness to those patient, these authors, labourers in ecclesiastical history, whose useful lives have been given to the study of the rise and progress of that society of which God is the head. Souls bought and washed with the most precious blood of Christ, the members and eternity, the end and aim. The founder of the Christian faith himself compares it, Mark 4:30-32, to a grain of mustard seed which, when it is sown in the earth, is less than all the seed that be in the earth. But when it is sown, it groweth up and becometh greater than all herbs, and shooteth out great branches, so that the fowls of the air may lodge under the shadow of it. Surely the similitude is most apt. At first a man of humble birth and life is baptized of John in the waters of Jordan. Less than 4 years after, his earthly career closes, and his work is entrusted to 11 apostles, none of them men of learning or parts, so they weren't literate, educated, etc., etc. They just were plain old Galilean fishermen, eking a living from catching fish and feeding the village, their families, etc. It was 11 instead of 12 because, remember, Judas betrayed Christ and he went and hung himself, supposedly. The world, save a single nationality, is entirely pagan, and the task allotted to these men is to Christianize it. Verily, that grain of mustard seed was less than all the seeds that be in the earth, but that which had been predicted should come to pass. A sound had gone out into all the earth, and words unto the ends of the world. Their founder, in his last charge to them, had claimed and commanded, all power is given unto me. Go ye therefore and teach all nations to observe all things that I have commanded you. Jesus to the disciples. And they went and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them spiritually, and confirming the word with signs following. Shortly after the Pentecostal marvel described above, we find the number of men professing Christianity, 5,000. A little later, and the word of the Lord had increased, and the number of the disciples had multiplied in Jerusalem greatly, and a great company of the priests was obedient to the word. Considering the incredulity and bigotry of the Jewish priests in the presence of Jesus and under the sight of his own miracles, this fact gives strong evidence of the power of Christian doctrine and the influence of the Holy Spirit that had been granted to his labourers. Yeah, a lot of the Jews, Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, elders, etc., actually witnessed his miracles. So, like when Peter and one of his friends, whatever, when the disciples got out of prison, they were joyous, they suffered, but they were full of joy. But they were told by these priests, these high priests, these Sadducees, Pharisees, whoever, don't go out there. We know he did these miracles. We actually saw it. Okay, we're not denying that, but don't you dare go out there and teach the people or do these things for the people, or else you'll suffer dire consequences, etc. It's all scriptural. A little later, and the word of the Lord had increased, and the number of the disciples had multiplied in Jerusalem greatly, and a great company of the priests was obedient to the word. Considering the incredulity and bigotry of the Jewish priests in the presence of Jesus and under the sight of his own miracles, this fact gives strong evidence of the power of Christian doctrine and the influence of the Holy Spirit that had been granted to his labourers. But this was only in Jerusalem, only in one city, one remote and obscure province of the Roman Empire. How was the new faith to reach the philosophies, idolatries and superstitions of the world so that all should be prostrated before it? The death of Stephen, deacon and proto-martyr, AD 37, followed by a severe persecution of the church in Jerusalem, scattered the Christian teachers heretofore congregated in that city throughout Syria and the adjacent countries, only the apostles remaining in the holy city. 7 years later, AD 44, the conversion of Saul, afterwards Paul, of Tarsus, afforded to the still growing band the powerful aid of one whose learning was only paralleled by a zeal, or a zest, and through whose industry the faith was planted first throughout the southern provinces of Asia Minor, then through the centre of the same wealthy and distinguished region, next through Macedonia and Greece, finally through the western provinces of Asia Minor. During this period of 15 years, AD 44 to 59, other missionaries were sowing the seed of Christian life in various parts of Italy, so that when Paul was carried a prisoner to Rome, AD 59, he was able to extend the influence of the church which he found there with great rapidity. Released from his first imprisonment, it is thought that for 9 years longer Paul laboured abundantly, visiting Crete, Spain and other quarters, and that returned to Rome, AD 68, he suffered for Christ in martyrdom there. By this, almost all the civilized parts of the earth had heard the glad sound. The northern provinces of Asia Minor, Chaldea, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia, Arabia and Ethiopia had received the gospel, and thus, gospel about Jesus Christ, right? Because Nineveh, Mesopotamia, etc. had already received it, about the message about God, His grace, His mercy, His love, etc. In Nineveh, these Asherai, these Ninevites were under the wrath of God, come under the wrath of God for their wickedness, their sins, etc. But they heard Jonah's preaching of the one true God, and they believed, and they converted, smashing all their maypoles, their idols, etc., putting on sackcloth even on the animals, and then throwing dust on themselves, probably saying unclean, unclean, forgive us, save us, etc. So they were spared for God's future plan, which is scriptural. By this, almost all the civilized parts of the earth had heard the glad sound, the northern provinces of Asia Minor, etc. About 30 years, scarcely a generation, even in the short life of the human race, amidst the movements of armies, battles, earthquakes, revolts of the Jews, ending in the destruction of their country and dispersion of their race, the uneasy reigns of Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius and Nero, each ending in violent death, that little grain of mustard seed had expanded into a mighty tree whose roots had struck deep in all parts of the civilized world, having already extended from the river Euphrates to the ends of the earth. 8 years later, as the pagan historian Tacitus acknowledges, a vast multitude of Christians at Rome suffered martyrdom. Pliny, another writer of the same class, both entirely reliable as historians and the more trustworthy witnesses to us, because enemies to Christianity, declares AD 107 that in the northern part of Asia Minor the new faith had nearly caused the heathen worship in those parts to be deserted. His letter to the Emperor Trajan declares with singular earnestness and an air of unquestionable candour that many of all ages, of every rank, of both sexes, likewise were accused of being Christians, and that the contagion of the superstition had not only seized cities, but the lesser towns also in the open country. This proves that in about 1/2 century the new religion, without any political power or extraneous influences, had almost subverted idolatry in some of the wealthiest provinces of the Roman Empire. The first Christian historian after the death of St. John, AD 100, was Justin Martyr, who wrote about AD 150. He describes the spread of Christianity that there was no race of men, whether barbarian or Greek, by whatever other name they might be designated, whether wandering in wagons or dwelling in tents, amongst whom prayers and thanksgivings were not offered to the Father and Creator of all in the name of the crucified Jesus. This was the work of the first century from the tragedy of Golgotha, a work done, it will be seen, without the aid of locomotive or train or telegraph, printing press or theological school, Bible seminary, university, colleges or anything like that, right? Only by men who went about the world, forsaking all, denying themselves, taking up their cross daily, providing neither gold nor silver, nor brass in their purses, nor scrip, neither two coats, neither shoes, nor yet staves, but telling to plain people the story of a crucified, risen and glorified Saviour, in whom there was welcome for the poorest and the worst. Under such preaching the most obdurate repented, were converted, their sins were blotted out, and they were refreshed for the presence of the Lord. 28 years later, about AD 178, we have the testimony of Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyons, that the new faith had been disseminated through Germany, France, Spain and Libya. 20 years later, Tertullian announces AD 198 that Parthia, Media, Armenia, the Gaetuli and Moors in Africa, parts of Britain, the Sarmatians, Dacians, Scythians and other nations and islands innumerable, had become subject to the spiritual dominion of Christ. The language of Tertullian is exceedingly fervent. We are but of yesterday, yet we have filled your empire, your cities, your islands, your castles, your corporate towns, your assemblies, your very camps, your tribes, your companies, your palace, your senate, your forum. Your temples alone are left to you. We constitute almost the majority in every town. 16 years later, AD 214, and new nations have been gathered under this now widely spread mustard tree. The labours of Oregon had converted the Arabs to Christianity. The Goths of Mysia and Thrace had owned the meek sway of the Son of God. And all this, it will be remembered, amidst the struggle of 9 Roman emperors and pretenders innumerable to the throne of empire. These successive reigns are thus summed up: Vespasian, AD 69 to 79, Titus, AD 79 to 81, Domitian, AD 81 to 96, Nerva, AD 96 to 98, Trajan, AD 98 to 117, Hadrian, AD 117 to 138, Antonius Pius, AD 138 to 161, Marcus Aurelius, AD 161 to 180, and Commodus, AD 180 to 218. The marvellous drama whose progress we are reviewing will be poorly understood, stripped of its accessories. Government opposition of every character, bigoted prejudices, political jealousies, persecutions accompanied by every description of cruelty that can be devised by the most fiendish malignity, even to martyrdom. These were the rebuffs clearly pointed out by the immortal founder, and he who went into pagan lands to preach this new faith literally took his life in his hand. Not to enumerate all the fiery trials recorded of the period, the first great persecutor of the church was Nero, a tyrant whose name became proverbial even with the heathen, for all that was abominable in impurity and fearful in cruelty. To conciliate the populace who had accused him of setting fire to the city of Rome out of sheer love of mischief, he was a prankster. He condemned the Christians to death and contrived their fate so as to expose them to derision and contempt. Some were covered over with the skins of wild beasts that they might be torn to pieces by dogs. Some were subjected to the fate of their crucified master. Some were daubed over with inflammable materials, set up in night time in the public gardens, and so burned to death. So these Romans, etc., could see what's going on in the arena, the events. Human torches. This was the commencement of persecution, and continuing from AD 64 to 68 was accompanied by so many incidents of horror that the Christians began at last to be commiserated as a people whose death was designed merely to gratify the cruelty of one man. But you have a look at the Annals of Tacitus, and he says that there was one who is even more cruel than him, prior to him, right? And it made Nero look the other way. You know, he just closed his eyes. He just couldn't bear to see what was going on. Okay? 25 years later, AD 93, the second general persecution began under Domitian, a monster only second in baseness to Nero. The meek spirit in which this was met by the Christians was regarded as nothing better than obstinacy and insanity, and the more patiently it was submitted to by the one, the more inflamed was the wrath of the other. So one was worse than the other. We do have somewhere here a book of Tacitus, and what it actually says. We can't see it at the moment. Okay, maybe it's over in this corner. Yeah, here it is. These are the Reader's Digest versions. Oh, that's Locke, Berkeley, Hume. Yes, it must be the other one. That's there. Got 2 or 3 of them that we picked up. There are props at a job that we worked at. Okay, that's about taxes. So what's this one? No, that's Machiavelli. It's still there. Fallen down or something. Ah, there we go. Actually fell down. Okay, so this is Tacitus, Britannica Great Books. Okay, and that series is about 54 or more of them. Okay, and it says here, biographical note, Tacitus. Okay, so here we go. This is biographical note, Tacitus, born 55, died around 117. Okay, this book was all ripped up for some reason. We're guessing it's like page, I'm not too sure what page it is. Yeah, but we've underlined it here. Tacitus was at the height of his powers, and a consulship was due him in the normal course of advancement. Yet, unless he would risk his life, he could not abandon his office, seek advancement, or absent himself. The orator chose silence, broken only when Domitian demanded flattery as an accompaniment to his acts of terror. The emperor enforced full attendance in the Senate when honourable men were being judicially murdered, so that he could see plainly whether you have any affection for me. That's what he was saying to these people. I'm putting you through this to see how much affection you have for me. Tacitus wrote of this experience, even Nero turned his eyes away and did not gaze upon the atrocities which he ordered. With Domitian, it was the chief part of our miseries to see and to be seen, to know that our sighs were being recorded. The assassination of Domitian in 96 brought unexpected release from this tyranny, which Tacitus said left some of the living no more than survivors of themselves. There can be no doubt of the effect upon him. We witnessed the extreme of servitude when the informer robbed us of the interchange of speech and hearing. We should have lost memory as well as voice, had it been as easy to forget as to keep silence. That he vowed to maintain memory during that period of unnatural silence seems probable, since the opening pages of his Life of Agricola, 98, refer to his histories as having been begun shortly after the death of Domitian. It would hold, he said, the memory of past servitude and then give testimony to present happiness. As he worked on this book, and later on the annals, the histories it's talking about, and then the annals, he extended his memory past the emperors of his childhood, the 4 who succeeded one another within 14 months after the death of Nero, to the death of Augustus. Yeah, and he was never out of public office during the rule of Nerva and Trajan. He advanced to the consulship in 97. With Pliny, he conducted in 99 a famous trial before the Senate. He is known from a recently discovered inscription to have held in 112 or 112 the important office of proconsul of Asia. It is not known whether he survived the Emperor Trajan, in whose reign his histories were brought out. He did not fulfill his intention of celebrating. Is that Nerva? Just see what this word is. Okay, it's folded up here. Oh yeah, celebrating Nerva and Trajan and the happiness of their times. The mixed spirit in which was met by the Christians was regarded as nothing better than obstinacy and insanity, and the more patiently it was submitted to by the one, the more inflamed was the wrath of the other. For 2 centuries, from Domitian to Diocletian, AD 81 to AD 285, the fire of persecution really slackened and never went out. Millions upon millions of the new faith were destroyed. The combat between Rome and Christ was l'outrance et la mort, unto extremity and unto death. No method of torture was neglected, and new trials of human endurance were continually invented. A diabolical ingenuity possessed the minds of pagans whose religious faith had not the least effect upon their own morals, but who were resolved that the profession of Christianity should be, as the Emperor Diocletian himself threatened, stamped out. So we suggest read Fox's Book of Martyrs. It basically says the same things there throughout the centuries, especially in those Roman times under these Caesars. We are in no danger of enlarging too much under this head in the opening chapters of work written for Christian believers of the 19th century. Had not, or even 21st century, had not the doctrines of Jesus Christ been reasonable ones, in the faith in his death and resurrection and intelligent faith, how could this unequal strife have been so long maintained? The lives of those early Christians during the first 3 centuries exhibited in the face of the world the power of faith. Their morality and virtue were patent to every beholder. The writers publicly appealed to this without the fear of contradiction. We formerly rejoiced in licentiousness, says one, but now we embrace discretion and chastity. We formerly set our affections upon wealth. Now we share our means with the poor. We formerly were so bigoted that we would not dwell with those of a different race. Now we live together and pray for our enemies. The question how far the institutions of Freemasonry existed and were made use of in those early days to extend and strengthen the ties of Christian brotherhood is one that has been ably discussed in an anonymous work entitled The Secret Discipline, published some 40 years since. That all the great associations of antiquity, the objects of which were to civilize and improve the conditions of mankind, were secret societies, as admitted by many historians. The mysteries of India, Egypt, Greece and Rome were secret orders, educational institutions established for the advancement of mankind in wisdom and virtue. Secret societies have their origin in the deepest and most pressing wants of humanity. And if, at the present day and in a land of freedom, we find this craving for esoteric brotherhood covering the United States with its secret philanthropies, how rational to conclude that in the periods of which these authors are treating, when government was oppressive and all its energies devoted to stamping out the new faith, that the great principle of esotery was brought to bear. As the authors have already seen, or they've already talked about, there was nothing novel in this. Did the teachers of the new faith convert a Jew? He was already familiar with the mysterious band of brotherhood in the Essenian and perhaps other fraternities. An Egyptian? But Egypt had been the seat of esoteric fraternities for thousands of years. A Syrian? He was already familiar with the secret rites of Adonis and other orders of that class. A Greek? His ancient country was the abode of some of the most renowned secret societies ever inaugurated. A Roman? The imperial city swarmed with secret fraternities, both male and female. The authors were frank to confess that while acknowledging due faith in the inspiration of Scripture and the animating spirit that upheld a Paul, a Justin Martyr, a Polycarp and other founders of the Christian Church, we cannot conceive the spreading abroad this new evangel without the assistance of secret brotherhood, such as Freemasonry. The authors felt confident, after a full review of church history from Golgotha to Byzantium, that the key to its success, viewed in its human aspects alone, is the secret discipline of which the anonymous author wrote. The author of this faith admonished his converts to be as wise as serpents. Paul, the great expounder and exemplar of the new faith, never disdained to use human wit and wisdom to circumvent the cunning of his adversaries, and it is no more derogatory to the divine spirit in which these men laboured to suppose that they travelled, preached, forwarded epistles, held conferences, and performed other acts of their ministry under Masonic assistance. Well, you have to have persecuted, etc., etc. Well, they would go underground, wouldn't they? They'd seek underground help, probably. So, as it says here, the other acts of their ministry were under Masonic assistance, a thing with which every public man of their day was familiar, that they ate the common food to sustain life and put on the common clothing to shield their bodies from the inclemencies of the season. The principle of secrecy furnishes a mysterious bond of unity and strength found in nothing else, and unless we suppose these early Christians worked miracles for their daily preservation, a thing to which they made no claim, we can do no better than to give credit to that. And so the drama went on for 3 centuries, and the world was becoming educated slowly but surely, and at infinite expense of human life and suffering, to accept the story of the cross is no longer an esoteric but an exoteric. No longer an esoteric but an exoteric fact. A thing no longer to be taught in whispers and upon the square, and at the peril of all that was dear to common humanity. When they're saying upon the square, it means that that's a certain way they stand. Okay? They stand square. Okay? And then they do their signs, which the other ones recognise. No one else knows them, but they recognise what signs they're pulling. Higher spiritual, it's like a triangle. Middle spiritual, chest area, and then upside down, lower spiritual, etc., etc. And at the peril of all that was dear to common humanity, but opening without reserve or disguise before a sinful and dying world. Here's a picture of Solomon's sealed fountain near Bethlehem.